And next up we have Jim Peterson, who is Judicial Watch's senior attorney and an expert on a topic I really want to ask him about, which is the deep state. Jim, thank you for being here. I'll give you that.
Thank you.
So, a topic that we have not talked about, even a phrase we didn't use very often until this last year, is deep state. So just for people who have heard it now but really don't understand what we're talking about, explain what that, in layman's terms, what we're talking about, referencing.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for having me. The deep state is a new term, but that we haven't heard much, but it's for something that's been going on for a long time. Most people probably have a sense that even though administrations change, a lot of things never change in Washington, and that's because there's this embedded bureaucracy in Washington that stays, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, and has its own interests going forward. In this case, most of these people are Democrats. Most of them have been employed by Democrats over the years, and what we've seen this year is really a remarkable example of how the deep state in the Washington establishment is doing everything it can to undercut the new presidency of Donald Trump.
And I think it's people. I would say very clearly. What is the size of the government? 3 million people.
Right.
Aside from maybe the military, I think the percentage is 90% Democrat. It's just a matter of principles that Democrats like government and like it, and so they're going to work there. And when a Republican, I worked in the Bush administration, State Department, when a Republican is president, he is given an executive branch that is working against him because they don't want him to succeed. It's not their point of view.
Right.
Now, they're not all actively working against him, but there are some wonderful public servants who are doing their job, whether they believe in it or not, and doing it. But there are some people who are absolutely, having worked at the state, I've seen it firsthand. Right. And so I don't know when it was started, but we created this concept of having each president gets 4,000 political slots. So it includes obviously their cabinet secretaries, and then throughout the executive branch, 4,000 that are at the top to say, we are implementing the president's agenda throughout the branch.
Right.
But this president hasn't put that many people in. How do you think that has impacted stopping the deep state and stopping people who are resisting from being stopped?
Well, that may be a factor. I think in some places. Large part of that is that the Senate has not been motivated to move quickly on nominees. It takes a long time to get even a non-controversial nominee through the process.
Right. We're 13 months into this administration, right. And we already, ambassadors are empty. I think there's several hundred piled up that the Senate just can't get through because the Democrats are being so resistant. Well,
that's right. You have to ask why, because it's in the absence of political appointees. Who's running these agencies? The career agency officials that are right near the top. They're not formally the heads or the deputy secretaries of things, but they're the ones that are actually running it.
Yep.
And as you say, we see this really dramatically in some places like state, where now, because the permanent career employees are unhappy about the new direction that this administration, the new Secretary of State, want to take, morale is awful, waves of people leaving.
That's true, it's true, but they're also leaking those stories.
Well, that's right. If they're not actively working to subvert it, they're actually leaving and complaining that they're not happy about where it's going.
As opposed to doing the job that you are paid for, serving the American people.
Right.
They're leaving, they're quitting, and they're talking to reporters and leaking information. And that's a lot where you guys come in on things that are being leaked, especially national security secrets.
Yeah.
So tell me about some of the cases that you've been working on.
Sure, absolutely. From the beginning of the Trump administration, we've been using our primary tool, which is the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA as people call it, to try to uncover what's going on deep in the bureaucracy, and we've already uncovered a lot of really startling information about how not just in state as an example, because the same people that were running the State Department during Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State and Kerry, they're still
acting,
there.
yes,
the same people that were resisting turning over her emails are still there.
And just to explain that, because I follow state just since I work there more closely, under the secretary there's a deputy, and there is one under Rex Tillerson, there's a deputy, but the undersecretaries is the next level down, and then the assistant secretaries. And from what I understand, I don't think any of them have been gotten through Senate yet. Yeah. So that means it's not that that job's not being done, it's being done by the person who was there before, who thinks Hillary Clinton is great, and who thinks her server in Chappaqua is fantastic, right? So
because they all knew about it.
Yes, and they helped build it, and they helped put it on her BlackBerry, and they helped. I mean, it's just mind-boggling.
They thought it was fine, and they were happy. They're entitled to their opinion, I guess, but they were happy with the direction, the foreign policy direction of things that were going on during Hillary and the Obama administration. I mean, that's the direction they want to go. And they're very unhappy when a new Secretary of State wants to come in and go a different direction. God forbid, reduce the size of the agency.
Yeah.
Do those
God forbid,
those kinds of things. So they push back, and we see it. We see it in state. Even more seriously in the national security areas, we see it at justice, where
that's the scariest. That's scariest. You're a lawyer, you understand. I mean,
it's very serious.
I think the most serious parts of what the deep state is doing against the Trump administration are in places of national security secrets and lawyers leaking things that are not supposed to be out there.
Right. I mean, and yeah, that is by far the most serious, because it affects not just the individuals, a few individuals, but affects all of our rights when law enforcement and prosecutors, feel entitled to openly violate, laws on privacy, on leaking, and other things. That affects and undercuts all of our rights.
Yes.
And so when we see that it's impossible, apparently, for the FBI or the top Justice Administration officials or the National Security Council for any kind of a secret to be, not just to be maintained, but then they've used the organs of these agencies to violate people's rights. And that's what this whole, the real Russia story is how these agencies were used to literally spy on the Trump team before the election and after the election, in complete disregard of the rights we all have.
And let's go back. We were talking about that earlier, Jerry, about if you weren't watching, we were talking about the FISA. FISA. What does FISA stand for again?
It's the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act.
Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. I know, we use the acronym.
We all use acronyms, which isn't
Welcome
really
to Washington,
right,
alphabet soup. Everything is an acronym.
Yeah, that's right.
John Bolton was here earlier, and I said, when I was at State, he was at State, and I said, I know you worked in the arms control, and and he goes, I was T. I'm like, that's right. It was a one letter, because I was PA. But everything in Washington is acronyms, and very few people know what they stand for. I have no idea what T stands for in arms control, but he was the Undersecretary for Arms Control. Anyway, on FISA, we can just keep saying it from now on. It's the law that says that the American government is going to spy on you. Remember, we couldn't before FISA. It was against the law to spy on Americans. That's why the CIA can only supposedly work outside of, unless obviously you're a criminal, which the FBI can do, but CIA can work outside of the country, not inside the country. FISA allows the government to go to court, get a warrant to spy on Americans, supposedly for what reason? Explain to us how that has played out.
I mean, for legitimate reasons, this process was set up so that, so the government wants to know, obviously, if foreign actors are up to doing things in the United States, or they're conspiring with people in the United States. So it makes sense that on certain occasions, certain very limited occasions, the government would have a legitimate right to undertake this kind of surveillance. And what's probably, to me, in Judicial Watch, I think the most disturbing thing about that's happened in the last year is...
And just so people who weren't tuned in earlier, explain how it was used by the Obama administration against the Trump campaign.
Sure, absolutely. Under FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, to add another acronym here, the government goes to a Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court that they call FISC, because we have to have a, okay. So what the FBI and the Justice Department did is, back in the summer of 2016, they used, and it's really just kind of startling, because it's now really undisputed by anybody, they used this so-called Steele dossier containing all sorts of misinformation about Donald Trump and his team. They used that Steele dossier as justification to go to this Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court to get these warrants to listen in on what was going on with the Trump team.
And by listening in, explain how they listen and what ways.
Sure, they listen to their phone calls. They tap into whatever communication system is going on. I mean, really, the kind of violation of our rights that we should all be very concerned about.
Yes, and that's why it's taken on, for Judicial Watch, you have so many supporters on the country on this issue alone, because if they can use false information to spy, listen to my phone calls, listen to what I'm saying in my house, I mean, the ramifications against the Constitution. Oh
yeah, I mean, nobody is safe at that point. If that's where we're at, they not only use false information, they made up information for this purpose. Apparently, they bought and paid for this made up dossier that we call it, of stuff that had no substance. But then they used it in the most serious way they could, and went to this court, lied to the court about what it was, and used that to violate, the rights of the incoming administration. It's very serious.
It's very serious, and thank goodness Judicial Watch is on top of this. They've got fantastic lawyers who are in the weeds, whereas most Americans can sort of understand the broad things, maybe understand Russia collusion. You guys are really working on protecting our rights as American citizens forever, not just this case, but to make sure that these things don't happen again. So thank you for spending some time explaining what you're doing. And we will hopefully have you back soon. Thank you.